Let's get it going on the Locked On Royals podcast, on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your teams every day. I am your host, Rylan Stiles. You can follow me on Twitter at Rylan_Stiles. Follow the show on Twitter at Locked On Royals. On today's show, we're talking about Dayton Moore, his era. What lessons can be learned from the Kansas City Royals organization as they transition away from Dayton Moore and into a new era, a new GM, a new manager, a new coaching staff. What all can the Royals learn? We'll talk about all that coming up on today's Locked On Royals podcast on the Locked On Podcast Network, your teams every day.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Let's get it going on the Locked On Royals podcast, on the Locked On Podcast Network, your teams every day. I am your host, Rylan Stiles. You can follow me on Twitter at Rylan_Stiles. Follow the show on Twitter at Locked On Royals. Email the show, lockedonroyals@gmail.com. On today's show, we're going to dive into the Kansas City Royals and what lessons they can learn from the past with Dayton Moore and what they can take moving forward with their new operation. I want to thank you so much for making Locked On Royals your first listen every single morning, every single day. We're here for you talking Royals baseball. For your second listen, stay on the Locked On Podcast Network and go check out the Locked On Sports Today podcast because they have you covered this year with every single vantage point and every single storyline from every single major sport. So today, they'll be talking World Series, life in the NBA, and of course, getting you set for another week of football, both college and pro. Loaded show today for Pete Bukowski and the Locked On Sports Today podcast, so go check that out as well. Now, we are going to dive into, like I said, the Royals and Dayton Moore. I don't think that the Royals and Dayton Moore's partnership was all bad. I also don't think it was all good. I think that we should view this tenure on this podcast as realistically as possible. Obviously, there's always going to be bias, and there's always going to be people who are anti-Dayton Moore, pro-Dayton Moore, to the point where they are just stuck in their own beliefs and their own kind of opinions. For me personally, I was never just enthralled with Dayton Moore, to be totally honest. But I think that he provided both do's and don'ts for the long term of this organization. I think that the biggest do he provided, like what the Royals should continue moving forward, is the Royals should continue having a great relationship with the city, with the fan base, and with their players. That is the one thing that the Royals have thrived at ever since Dayton Moore took over, was they are well respected. Players view that they've been treated fairly by the Royals, and that this is a comfortable environment to work in and to play for, and they like their time here, even though a lot of them, of course, never experienced winning in Kansas City. The quality of life was there. There is a spot for that, right? Now, I've said before, if that's what you're very, very best at and you're not good at the baseball side of things, well, then you should go be a community outreach leader, which is what I think Dayton Moore is more suited for. So the Royals have to find a balance there. They do need to keep that community outreach thriving, as well as keeping it a great place for players to play and one that agents don't look down upon, because while the Royals are never going to get the top of the line free agents, right? Aaron Judge won't even take a meeting with Kansas City this offseason. What they can do is develop that good rapport with agents, and so guys who still have something to give but are maybe on the back end of their career, or they're still talented but looking for that bounce-back destination, will sign in Kansas City, to where you get Michael A. Taylor in free agency through his agent. And Michael A. Taylor, despite the Royals not winning during this time, Michael A. Taylor still had two of his best years in Kansas City, like two of the best years of his career in Kansas City. Kendrys Morales, another guy that was looking for a bounce-back shot, took it with the Royals, and of course was a pivotal part in the World Series and winning a championship. So there's a lot here to digest of like what good and bad that Dayton Moore did in Kansas City. I think that the only glaring, like just totally negative aspect of Dayton Moore's tenure was the fact that he built a historic minor league system that everyone agreed was the top prospect system in baseball, the top farm system in baseball. And yet, to show for it, there's only two playoff appearances in a nice 2013 season and an okay, 2016 season. That's all you have to show for it, for building up that historic prospect capital, that historic prospect currency, which is the currency of, you know, baseball, especially in a small market. So whenever I look at that, right, and I look at the pros and cons to Dayton Moore, I think that the biggest con is you have to treat this more like a business. You do. You can't hold on to guys too long. You need to trade them when the getting's good, so to say. And I think that one of the primal examples of that was Whit Merrifield. And I think that you also can't kind of get too attached, which I think that Dayton Moore did a little bit. This is all, of course, speculatory. But I think that whenever you're so close to something or someone or a team or whatever, right? If you're working with the Royals day in and day out, and you're seeing them practice and play hard in practice and, take ground balls efficiently, and you're seeing them in Surprise, Arizona, putting in the work to make their dreams a reality. Seeing all of that, being so close to them, and then getting to know them personally, you want it so bad for them that they be good, that they experience, they experience winning, they experience good times, a good career, everything. You've grown so attached to them that you get kind of blinded. And I think that if you're speculating here, the biggest con for Dayton Moore is that he got blinded a lot. There's no good reason that the Royals didn't trade Whit Merrifield 2 years ago, 3 years ago. The only reason is that, Dayton Moore always felt like, hey, we're close, we're close, we're close. When in reality, they've gotten worse and worse and worse, and they weren't close. But in the moment, it feels like, okay, Hunter Dozier, he's going to break out. In the moment, it feels like, okay, we've got Bobby Witt Jr., he's going to come on, burst on the scene, be an all-star his first year, and we're close, we're close. In the moment, it feels like, hey, we've got all these young pitchers, they're eventually going to, get called up, and they're going to hit the ground running and be awesome. Like, in the moment, it feels differently than whenever you have the privilege of hindsight. So I think that that's important, too. I think that that is a huge part of it, right, is getting too attached. You need to find that healthy balance of being open and being there for your players if you're in that position, but also not being afraid of that bond breaking by trading them or, sitting them down or whatever the case is. And on one hand, it's good to give players a long leash to develop and to show themselves and prove themselves. But on the other hand, in a small market especially, you don't have that luxury, right? Like, your only way to improve your team is through the draft and through trades. You're not going to sign a free agent that's going to have any impact on your roster in a massive way, right? They can improve on the margins, right? But when I say massive way, you're not going to sign an all-star. You're not going to sign a multi-time all-star, a superstar player. To get one of those, you've got to draft well, or you've got to push all your chips in and trade well. So with trades, it's also not trading just for a superstar. It's trading for prospects who eventually turn into cult heroes and great players. And maybe that's also a way to find talent in the margin, of course, of trading for prospects who maybe you see something in that other teams don't. I mean, how many times have the Rays had, guys come out of nowhere, where like Randy Rosarena, comes out of nowhere and is a World Series hero and now is an awesome player. That's how you win in small markets. How many times have the Indians, the Guardians, just pooped out players? and pitchers primarily for the Guardians. That is kind of the destination point for the Royals that they need to get to. We'll talk more about that coming up, but first, I want to tell you right now about our good friends over at Rhone. Rhone is incredible. Remember that you are a great, incredible person, business person, lively person, and a person who needs great, incredible clothes. Look, we all have a chaotic lifestyle at times, right? Where maybe one second you're in a business meeting, but the next second you want to go play some pickup basketball, and the next second you're going to wrangle kids around, and the next second you want to take on to a excursion at a fancy restaurant or something. And we know that with that chaotic lifestyle, it's hard to change clothes for each and every occasion. That is going to be very hard for you to do, but you still want to look your best at each and every occasion. Well, what if I told you that Rhone is a clothing company that is going to be there for you, that has everything that you need? Mobility, it is a good look, it has odor free tech that keeps away odors if you're sweating or something to that nature. Make sure you check out how versatile Rhone is and go right now to Rhone.com/locked on and use the promo code locked on. You'll have 20% off of your entire order. That's 20% off your entire order for their clothes at Rhone, RHONE.com/locked on. Use code locked on. They're going to help you find what you need with their incredible clothing line at Rhone. Check it out today at Rhone.com/locked on. Promo code locked on as well. We're back on the Locked On Royals podcast, on the Locked On Podcast Network, your teams every day. I'm your host, Rylan Stiles. You can follow me on Twitter at Rylan_Stiles. Follow the show on Twitter at Locked On Royals. Email the show, lockedonroyals@gmail.com. On today's show, brought to you by our good friends over at Rhone and also Locked On Sports Today podcast. And also, folks, Across the Parking Lot is still in season. Go check out Locked On Chiefs 5 days a week, talking about your Chiefs. They're going to get you set for this game on Sunday, which is, hello, folks, a game after a bye week, which Andy Reid is typically great in. It's a home game against the Titans, which you can go to in Kansas City. Go check it out today. Locked On Chiefs, getting you set for that primetime Sunday Night Football matchup. Now, so the do's and don'ts, right? The don'ts, I think, are easier to listen than the do's. Don't get too attached to players. Like, if you need to trade somebody, if you have value on the table, take it, even though, hey, they might be a fan favorite. Hey, it might make fans kind of mad at the time, but you know what makes fans happy? Winning. You know what winning is created from? Good trades and good draft picks. Trades are vital to make. Instead of just holding on to it, Merrifield, and letting him, have two-hit wits, but it's in, 80, 90, 100 loss seasons. Look, you kind of forego that, right? Miss out on two-hit wit extravaganza and make your team better, instead of waiting and then trading Whit Merrifield whenever he's having a career low year and is in every statistical category, right? So you have that. They have to draft better. They just do. Like, look at Dayton Moore's track record in the draft. It's awful. They have to draft better. And I think that another don't would be kind of in the same nature of the trades, but don't get attached to a certain game plan. I would say maybe be flexible. Like it felt like Dayton Moore wasn't very flexible. Like, it felt like, okay, every year we're just going to roll out Hunter Dozier, no matter how bad he is. Every year we're going to call up Ryan O'Hearn, no matter how bad he is. Every year we're going to call up Ryan McBroom, no matter how bad he is. And every year we're going to only give Edward Oliveira one little opportunity and then take it away from him, no matter how good he's playing. Like, it felt like there was a very much structured plan that they would not deviate from whenever other opportunities or other data points arose. Sometimes you got to go with the flow, and maybe you want to get, you come into the year wanting to get a certain guy every day at bats an opportunity, but another guy is playing better than him, and so then that kind of alters what you want to do or what your plans are, or what your kind of what your kind of plan should be, so to say. So that's what I'm looking for. Now, I think that with the dues, I really enjoyed how much the Royals stayed out of scandals, how much the Royals, had that community bonding between the Royals and Kansas City, but also, again, as I mentioned in the first segment, how they kept up the reputation with them and agents by not dealing in arbitration that often. I believe it was like the first time ever last offseason that the Royals and a player went to arbitration and didn't settle beforehand or get an extension done to cancel out arbitration. Like doing those things were all great. Because of course it might not even be for that specific player, right? It might be, hey, we've got a B tier player under this agency, but he's also going to have an A plus player under his agency that eventually might need a new home. And they'll always remember how we took care of B plus player. So looking at it from that vantage point, I think is awesome for the Royals to continue to do that because why not? What's the alternative? Making agents mad to where even if you had a great team, they wouldn't want to send somebody to your team like that. That's not great either. It may never pay dividends, as it didn't really pay dividends for Dayton Moore. It may never pay dividends, but eventually, if you just somehow build a juggernaut team in Kansas City, you're going to want to have that luxury of maybe a guy on the back end of his career that wants a championship ring will look at your team and say, look, they're true contenders. I'll take less because I know they're going to do things the right way there. They're going to treat me the right way there. Things like that were things that I think Dayton Moore did really well. I think he did those really well. They didn't lead to a lot of winning, but they did a lot. He did that a lot of well. What does that even mean? Talking more about the Dayton Moore era, I think that this podcast will really put a closure on the Dayton Moore era, talking about lessons to learn, and moving forward, we'll talk about what lessons can we learn from the playoffs. I think that these playoffs have been very eye-opening for what the Royals need to improve upon and need to do. But also, on Friday, I'm going to talk about where the organization sits. Now we've closed the chapter on Dayton Moore, but my thing is, we've closed the chapter on Dayton Moore. Now, where do the Royals go from here? How are they viewed right now? Like, what should the expectations be for this season? And then how do they get where they want to go? Because Mr. Sherman has already made it very clear that the goal is to be perennial winners and not perennial losers, which they've been, for the most part of my entire life. So how do they get there? How do they reach that mountaintop? We'll talk about moving forward on Friday. On Thursday, we'll talk about what these playoffs have shown is the pathway to building a contender in the modern era of baseball. And then next week, on Monday, I want to talk about the rule changes. I think that I genuinely believe that these rule changes can save baseball. Like, of course, whenever you say that phrase, a lot of baseball fans get all up in arms, like, oh, it doesn't need saving, like, it's still a great sport. And obviously, I agree with you, it's a great sport. But I think that what it can do in terms of saving baseball isn't as dramatic as it sounds. It's just, what I'm meaning by that is just getting back the casual fans. Getting back the casual fans that would only watch the playoffs and then maybe watch a few games on prime time, Sunday night baseball or a Monday night, whenever nothing else is happening, and in the summertime, like getting back those kind of fans, I think can happen. I think that can happen with these rule changes. I want to talk about that coming up as well. So it's going to be a very fun episode, very fun week. Subscribe for free across all podcasting platforms so you never miss an episode. And until next time, be good and be good to one another.